then on keyboards was not, you know, virtuoso style, was it?
No.
I'm sure I probably put some pressure on after a given length of time that, you know, look, either let me join or I'll just go somewhere else, because I don't want to be a part-time session musician, really.
Because it was like a one-off single, there wasn't a commitment to doing a whole album. It was kind of like, well, let's give it a bit of a trial, see how it goes.
We had a hard time recording that song. It was the longest we'd spent in the studio doing anything. You know, we tried many different ways to sort of make it work. And that time was really experimenting as well with trying to get as much level on tape as you could. And we always complained to Daniel that our records weren't as loud as everybody else's on the radio.
It was very difficult to mix because you're sitting there in front of the mixing desk and the words keep coming out of the speakers, get the balance right, get the balance right, and you're trying to get the balance right. It was, yeah, the first difficult mix that we did, I think.
It was weird, later on it got picked up by sort of like Detroit sort of underground club people as being sort of an important club song.
I simply thought it was really, really funky. Maybe somebody might laugh at that and say, well, how the hell could that Depeche Mode be funky? With that record, Get the Balance Right, we bought 2 copies and we used to mix the beginning over and over again on the instrumental side. And it became like a big club hit in Detroit with all, you know, with all the kids of our age.
The 12-inch was just, you know, starting out and becoming popular. So we felt that you know, it was actually quite fun making them anyway, but that we felt that we should be making them.
I mean, you had people in the black community that were way down with the music. In the States, we had no image, no marketing, there was no planning for them. So I'm sure it was by accident, other than these white label sort of jackets that came across from Sire Records at the time. So you get no impression other than the music itself. Nobody knew who these guys were. It's almost predictable.
When you go back and say people like Derek May were influenced by or inspired by Get the Balance Right, it's great. You would never have thought it at the time. And I think you'd probably get the band scratching their heads about that.
To be honest, the answer to your question, I don't know what people like about it. He never really did it for us.
It was another one of those interim singles, you know. I think by the time we got to do Construction Time again, they'd moved on and it didn't really fit on the album.
That and It's Called a Heart were the only times where we felt pressured to make a single when we didn't necessarily have material. You know, again, if you go back and change history, you know, we may not be around today if we hadn't released that single at that point. So whoever was pressurising us to put a single out was probably right.
Construction Time again is a lyric from Pipeline, I believe, and it just seemed to stand out as a good line to sort of sum up what was going on at the time with the group and how it came after A Broken Frame, which is some kind of comment on Vince leaving, and I think Construction Time again is some kind of comment on the group coming back together and rebuilding. So it seems to suggest this kind of optimistic feeling that everyone had.
I think it was a very interesting time in music because both the way the sound was developing and the technology and the way that the bands were developing, they really did go in tandem.
There was a lot of interest in that area of what was going on. And was it, well, are they jumping on a bandwagon? Well, actually, no, they're probably driving it.
Construction Time again was absolutely the changing point. When I first heard it, it was like a relief. And I went, everything I've said about the band's true. People are going to believe me now. This is the album that's going to do it. And it did. It got a lot of people excited, a lot of people into the band.
There was a momentum. The band wanted to get in the studio and do records and move on, and construction time again was a massive sonic change for the band. We felt we were pushing the boundaries, definitely. There's no question about that. Not just about the sounds, but it's all about the context of how you use them, and the pop band using those kind of sounds. I don't think anybody had really done that.
It was our first combined effort, including Alan, that sounded like the sort of Depeche Mode sound was starting to emerge.
Something went wrong along the way.
I'd say I felt like the new member for quite a long time, for many years really, and yeah, it did require some diplomacy to try and put my ideas forward without appearing too pushy or too, wanting to take over,
Alan coming into the studio gave us a whole new, because he's such a fantastic musician, so it meant we could do more.
He became a very important part of the band because he was a classically trained musician. None of us were.
See, Alan was able to take an idea and exaggerate it and bring some musicianship to it and experiment with different chords and really sort of help us to grow.
I quite liked the fact that he was there because he was like almost like having a teacher checking your work before it goes out,
I think that was the first record where you could say we actually did sit down before we started and really decided how we were going to utilise the technology that was coming in at that time and really try to do something that was a big step forward from what had gone before. And a lot of that was down to bringing in Gareth Jones.
Well, Gareth brought an awful lot of energy. He just brought all this enthusiasm to the recording process.
Gareth's very technical, and I think he helped a lot with the sampling. I mean, he was really enthusiastic. I mean, it was very difficult to... I think it still is to this day. It's difficult to get Gareth to sit still for more than 20 seconds.
I can remember specifically a meeting in Mute offices with Gareth, the first time we met him, and he was incredibly excited by the whole prospect of sort of going to record together, and it rubbed off on all of us.
What I knew about the band was not very much, but what I knew I didn't think I really liked. They were on the radio for a start off, and I wasn't listening to much music that was on the radio. So that was like for me at that time, that was like a problem. It was like a pop band. That's what I thought about them. A pop band, a bit kind of lightweight. I missed out on the chance to meet the band initially when they came down to the studio because of my perception of their reputation. But my mentor and older colleague John Fox came to me and kind of had a private word. He said, "Look, Gareth, these guys are really interesting. Daniel Miller's done, Warm Leatherette. John bought that when it came out, and we listened to it in the studio when we were making Metamatic, and that was kind of mind-blowing. And he said, look, this is the guy who made Warm Leatherette. It's a really interesting label. Get your ass down there and meet them. They're looking for an engineer, basically." So I was grumbling a bit, but I thought, well, he's probably right, And, that was the start of a long set of friendships and creative work,
There was a lot of fear that we were going to get forgotten just around the corner and that we just had to do everything. You know what it's like when you're young, you can take a heavy workload.
There was no corner cutting, there was no oh, you know, who cares, let's just shove it out, you know, we've done enough, like, whatever, let's go. You know, there was no question that we were going to leave the studio until we'd made the record that we wanted to make.
You've got to work hard, you've got to work hard. You've got to work hard, you've got to work hard. You've got to work hard, you've got to work hard. You've got to work hard, you've got to work hard.
One of the things I really wanted to do, and I think that's why our first meeting we hit it off, was I wanted to try and like help toughen their sound up a bit.
So I think that was one of the things that we were trying to go for, a bit more of a different kind of spatial feel for the records, and a bit of a harder sound.
And one of the ways we did that was by playing all the synthesizers through amplifiers in acoustic spaces, you know, and recording the sound of the space as well as the sound of the synthesizer.
We'd go out sampling, like on construction sites and recording things.
I think I bought a Stellavox, which is a classic analog, very high quality portable battery operated tape recorder.
He was really into experimenting with different microphones and trying recording in different places.
And we all went off with drumsticks and hammers.
And just hit every piece of metal and piping and fence that we could find, you know, recorded the trains going past, and then went back into the studio, and then we started building our songs using these found sounds.
Excitement for us of the sampler was the very fact that you could take any sound and make it play in rhythms and melodies, you know. Pipeline
springs to mind immediately, because that's a track that uses nearly all of the sounds that we found in Shoreditch, or the pipes and the fences being hit, and it's quite radical from that point of view. It doesn't sound radical these days, but at that time, there are not many people doing that kind of thing.
We took the samples back to the studio and put them into the sampler and started to manipulate them, and then realised that if we can take the concept to the end, we should record Martin in that space as well. So that's what we did. We made up a backing track using all the samples, took that down, played that back to Martin on one machine and recorded him with another machine, singing in this old building site. It was right by a railway, so that's where all those little train sounds come from.
When we mixed Pipeline as well, we didn't use any artificial equalization or reverberation or anything. It was all it was like a bit of an audiophile concept. When we came to mix it, we just thought it just sounded really good without additional stuff piled on it. So I suggested, look, well, let's just try and make it work with the balance only.
On this golden day, words been sent our way that could last a lifetime. Working on the pipeline, from the heart of our land to the mouth of the man, must reach sometime.
Pipeline as a conceptual piece for a band at that stage in their career, I thought was a really great thing to do, and that the fact that they wanted to do it, that we managed to do it, and that it worked, I think it was quite a good achievement.
Although that was a very commercial album, there were songs that had much greater width to them, so much greater depth as well. So here's a real audio treat where you're getting a much bigger sound and something that's quite dynamic.
Because we were messing about with sampling, a lot of things were accidents, really. They weren't meant to happen. Like the sound at the beginning of Everything Counts, the kind of scraping sound, that was just a complete fluke. like two sounds had been transposed. So we didn't really know how to use the equipment. We ran the sequencer and it started and it made that sound. We thought, wow, that sounds great.
The thing about Everything Counts is it wasn't just, for me, it wasn't just a great record or a great song or it was the soundscape and the way that they'd made the record. It just took Depeche into another area.
The handshake seals the contract. From the contract, there's no turning back. The turning point of a career.
Everything Counts is one of those real highlights in their single collection, you know. It's got this easy hook, even for folks who don't speak fluently German. Everything counts, everybody knows what it means. Everything Counts was a smash, yeah.
Grabbing hands, grab all they can, all for themselves, after all. The grabbing hands, grab all they can, all for themselves, after all. It's a competitive world. Everything counts in large amounts.
As we recorded it, we realised it was quite strong and, lyrically a bit of a move forward, and it seemed to be obvious that we should go for that as a single. And it was received very well, probably better than perhaps we expected it to be.
That really put us back on the map, in Britain particularly, and started to do really well in other countries with Everything Counts, so that was a real turnaround for us.
It's a great pop song, Everything Counts. I mean, it's got some very unusual pop noises in it, but it's a pop song, and it very different from anything that they'd done before sonically.
Grabbing hands, grab all they can, all for themselves, after all.
We did all the recording at the Garden, and then we had to go to Psalm East Studios because we needed to make multi-track copies, safety copies, to go to Berlin. And Psalm was quite expensive, but quite a cutting-edge studio. And I remember that the assistant who was working there, who helped us do the copies, was saying, we thought we'd made a quite good, interesting record. And he was just saying, I've never heard anything like this before. This is amazing. He was raving about it. He was just a kid, but you suddenly think, hang on, maybe there's something more that we've got here than we thought, in a way, We were constantly trying to explore new sounds. And certainly some of the songs really lent themselves to that, some of the lyrics really lent themselves to it. But although the lyrics were written generally before we started using sampling, I think it was a good kind of coincidence that the two things happened at the same time.
I think there was huge pressure on Martin because here he was delivering effectively his second album in a very short space of time, and because the band were being hugely successful, there is all that kind of the usual worry of second album syndrome. This is actually the band's third album, but it's Martin's second album.
The full weight of Martin's kind of responsibility as a songwriter, he kind of felt probably more during the writing for Construction Time Again, so naturally it was more cohesive, plus the band had a bit more, they'd been around the world pretty much by then.
We've had enough of this blind man's path. You've kept us in the dark for long enough. This is more than a party.
Lyrically, that album sort of stands out from the others, having quite a different slant. Most of Martin's songs are very personal, but on that album they're not. They're kind of more outward looking, and I think that came from suddenly being exposed to the world,
I think at that time people were saying, well, what's going on? It can't all be sweetness and light and parties, and maybe it was just people were becoming aware of the social conditions.
Keep telling us we're to have fun, then take all the ice cream so we've got none. This is more than a party.
found their voice and had a public that were listening to them. Now the press suddenly realised, okay, and they were given, the blessing. You're okay now. We're going to put you on the front cover. It matters.
We had to go beyond the haircut. There had to be more substance and more credibility to what we were writing about. So we had to, if the people didn't tell us a story, we didn't really make something up, but there had to be an angle, and to be honest, I think in those days, Enemy and Sounds and Melody Maker wrote about a load of rubbish bands just because they talked a good story.
I recall a journalist, I think he was from the Enemy, called X Moore, and he said, right, Construction Time Again is basically the Labour Party manifesto, isn't it? And I don't think that they had ever really thought of the political angle.
All the subject matter was, sort of worldly. I think Martin was writing outside of himself, and teenagers growing up, and bad government and all that stuff was suddenly. So yeah, this guy was really into it, and I think we were a little bit scared of him, to be honest.
Let's take a map of the world, tear it into pieces. All of the boys and the girls will see how easy it is.
To get Exmoor to write about them, if you knew what the Enemy was like at that time, it's obvious that they're being put into that context. A lot of the lyrics are political, so they are open to interpretation in that way.
I'll have faith, alright, prefer to think that things couldn't turn out worse.
When you look back, you can see there is a sort of overall picture of the thing. Now, how much of that was really Martin's intention to write a collection of songs that all pretty much said the same thing, or whether it was just a sort of coincidence that that's how he was feeling,
Grabbing hands grab all they can, on the lead single on that album. There's clearly some kind of element about his business. He was writing in some way about money and business.
It's all part of a process where we were starting to grow up and starting to challenge what we'd done previously.
We were getting a bit older and more worldly. We'd even been to Asia, so we were becoming more aware of the world as a whole.
Everything that you do during a period affects the songwriting.
Took a plane across the world, got in a car. When I reached my destination, I hadn't gone far.
I felt at the time that I should be contributing songs. I've never felt I'm a natural songwriter, and I never found it easy to come up with words. But I thought, well, here I am in a group, surely I should be contributing some songs.
Like, for instance, in Speak and Spell, Martin had been the junior writer, we just said, Alan, if you want to write some songs, write some songs.
On Broken Frame, Martin wrote everything, I believe, so that was obviously a big thing for the group, suddenly to have, if you like, the new boy writing some of the songs. But it didn't really mean very much to me. I just approached the whole thing as a body of work.
He probably heard of some of my demos first, and then got a general theme maybe, and then I came up with those two songs.
And those two songs seemed to be the best ones I'd come up with, and so it was agreed that we could, should record those too.
It definitely helped. I mean, that was 2 less songs I needed to write for that album.
No sanctuary, so welcome to your loss. 2 minutes later, when time has come, my days are numbered. 2 minute warning.
can't remember when I had the initial sleeve design conversation with Brian, but I'm sure it was at a point where we were already making the record, so I'm sure that the sound of record informed that discussion.
Presumably they kind of listened to what Martin was trying to write about at the time and applied their own ideas to that, which is why you get this kind of socialist look to that early artwork that goes around Construction Time again in the singles.
The kind of political look of the things was more fashion than specific statement. If you look back, you'll see a lot of those kind of elements creeping in, you know, of both fascist and communistic kind of iconography. You know, it was exciting looking stuff, and I think that nobody had really plundered it to market an everyday product like a record.
I would have worked on it, but I cannot lay claim to the idea. It has to be a combined effort, which it was. But anyway, they said, we want a worker with a sledgehammer on top of a mountain. I went, right, okay. So what happened was that, again, Stuart Graham, who was my assistant at the time, flew with me to Switzerland with now his brother, who was an ex-Royal Marine, as our assistant. Perfect physique, perfect fitness to carry all the gear, and a real sledgehammer. And being as keen as mustard or whatever, we were the first off the plane through passport control. And I went down, and there, I remember coming down some steps with Stuart and his brother, and the carousel was below, and the police were over near the customs area. And the first thing off the plane was the sledgehammer in the plastic bag, and it bang crash onto the stainless steel of the carousel. I looked across to the police, and the police started walking across, and then they could not believe we'd bought a sledgehammer to Switzerland, because they just go out of the airport to a hardware store and just get it, you know. But we were determined to take our own, you know, a real worn one, not a brand new one. And we did. We got through okay, it was a bit of a laugh or whatever. And then we set off to the Matterhorn. We took the cable car, and then we had to walk even higher after that, so we could get the Matterhorn in the distance. And it's interesting because, you know, I was one of the photographers prior to Photoshop. And because of the construction of the image, especially the album cover, it looks like you could have put the Matterhorn in later. And people do comment on that, but it's not at all. We were actually up there, and that is the assistant's brother, ex-Royal Marine, with his sledgehammer. And I never thought of any of it, you know, being politically powerful or about work or about workers or anything.
In those days especially, we used to really work on the singles a lot more. And we used to, you know, in advance, we'd be picking out a track, and then it'd be really, with Daniel, I mean, very focused on it, too focused, to be honest.
Well, we were very focused on chart positions, because they really meant something much more even than they do today, you know. It meant something if you were in the top 10 in the UK, actually. Things happened because of that.
The thing is, there's a difference between people playing your records on the radio and being involved and really getting behind them. That's very important. I mean, you've all seen the difference between this record and the last record where Mike Reid used to rave about the last one. Yeah. It's quite different than Peter Powell. He suddenly started really raving about your records, which he didn't ever do before.
Single now.
And then Dan. Told you so.
Told you so.
Where do you think it would go? Where would you, can you guarantee where it would go, Neil?
Can't guarantee anything, but I think it's top 5.
Daniel always came to me with a fait accompli, and I think part of the reason for, in terms of choosing singles, and I think part of the reason for that was because he always knew I'd have an opinion, and I would always kind of want to voice my opinion and kind of worry about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. So if he came to me and said, right, this is what we're doing, and then I had a view, then it would be easier to discuss it and try and work it out. If it was like, we have these choices, Neil, I think I would just cause more confusion, because I would just, you know, I would get in the middle of it, and it would be difficult for everyone.
Neil felt that, you know, he had to perform. Well, I think it was feeding the beast, feeding the radio. We're going to be successful. I want more platinum records, etc., etc. Hello, Neil. Ball breaker.
I think Love in Itself was one of our strongest singles, you know. But we didn't really have much option. There were really good tracks on the album, but not particularly singles.
It didn't perform as well. One of the reasons could be that people were buying the album, which if that was what was happening, then that's fine.
All of this insurmountable task that lay before me. All of the first and the definite last that lay in store for me.
Love in Itself was a very strange single anyway. I mean, I don't think it was a great choice as a you know, pop hit. You know, it's quite slow and it's quite odd.
Love's not enough in itself.
It definitely was sort of radical, but people were so hungry for new stuff from Depeche Mode, you know. They didn't mind it, they accepted, they bought everything which came out at that time, all mixes and all, you know. So it wasn't a particular problem.
Something that comes through on that record is a genuine enthusiasm and excitement. That's why I like the album. We were getting on well. You know, it was my first chance to record an album with them, and we had this new person in the studio, so he was kind of pushing everybody to impress, Daniel included. And I think it was a brand new team, a feeling that it was a brand new team, people working together, and we were going to do something, you know, to push us forward.
It was definitely like that. I mean, Neil had been the radio promotions guy since day one. Dan had been the agent. There were others involved as well, Chris Carr. There were only like 3 or 4 people working at Mute at the time. This was the team we'd built by default or by chance that had been very, very effective. And yeah, I was very lucky to be around those people. Yeah, definitely. I got a lot of advice. Because I was just like seat of the pants completely for me. I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
All of these absurdities that lay before us. All of the doubts and the certainties that lay in store for us.
That's the first album that I really kind of went, yeah, okay, I get it. They seem to be a band with a purpose.
They got into their own category by '83. I don't think people were necessarily comparing them to anybody at that point or grouping them with anybody. People recognised a big step forward and recognised that they'd grown, that Martin had grown a lot since A Broken Frame and the nature of what The Broken Frame was about in the time and the history of the band. And this was kind of... I don't want to say it was Martin's first proper album as a writer, but it was probably the first fully formed album as a writer.
The album, I presumed when I first heard it, was going to be one of those kind of seminal albums that people look back on and get very excited about. I'm not sure that people, when they look back on Depeche Mode, actually say that now, because I think possibly Violator becomes the album. But I think it was a very big changing point.
They were producing something musically that was quite different, but melodic and accessible. People were saying they've got 2 good songwriters in the band, you know, and Martin's becoming a writer of note, and Dave seemed to be developing a personality on stage.
He was always somebody who
you know, I think liked being in the limelight and liked being sort of out there.
Dave didn't need any encouragement because not only was he a good singer, he was also a great dancer. The kids loved that about him, especially the girls. I mean, he used to shake his hips and a lot of girls would scream, and that was just the way it was.
You can't erase your history when it comes to a particular artist or a particular group that you like. You can't just turn off, that was a part of my youth. That was a very important part of my musical growth. Indirectly, subconsciously, Depeche Mode had an impact on how I made music. I didn't copy them, I didn't replicate them, I didn't attempt to be like them in any form or fashion. Neither did Juan Atkins or anybody else from Detroit. But they did have an impact, like it or not. It is a fact.
The perception of the band in different places was changing because they as people were changing, you know, when they first started. I mean, as you see from some of the very early photos, you know, they were dressed in a fashionable style or whatever.
New romantic, it was
New
called,
romantic.
Yeah. I coined that phrase.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, well done.
Everything was growing, scenes were happening, and Depeche Mode had their own agenda and scene. The Basildon Hordes multiplied and became the Birmingham Hordes, became the Geordie Hordes, became everything into the Depeche Horde, and it couldn't be ignored.
Right, well, this is it. This is the end of the tour. Last night at Hammersmith, and we're all a bit knackered, but it's been a very successful tour. The least amount of keyboard problems we've ever had, and all in all, a great success. Cheers.
The ground